Everybody, and welcome to another Thunderbird Aviation Seminar, maintenance seminar. This time we're talking about cleaning out the cobwebs, bringing your airplane out of hibernation from winter. And we are here with our Director of Maintenance, Paul Bloch.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for showing up on this kind of dreary spring day, but at least it is spring and it's not snowing out. So, and basically that's what we're going to be talking about today is, I don't know about you guys, but I haven't flown a lot this winter, and, the plane does a lot of sitting. And so we're just going to go over a few items today that will help just ensure safety and no problems when you start flying again, at least eliminate some of the possibilities. So first thing I'd like to talk about is just do a general good pre-flight over the airplane, because look for critters, birds nesting, anything that comes into, it's been sitting around. A lot of these guys have been looking for places to hang out. And one of the things you want to do is, if you get a chance, if you feel comfortable with it, I don't know how your engine bay, your airplane is. On the Warrior, I have this off because we're doing a 100-hour on it right now. I'm doing a prop review to show you the ease of this, but take a look inside the engine cowling. A lot of times things like nesting and sitting in areas, and you'll start to fly and come out there and it's like, man, it really smells as nests and things start burning. So just kind of look at any of your air intakes and stuff for your heater and any fresh air into the cabin, and just kind of go over it. Look. Sometimes in between the cylinders, you can see stuff down in there. Critters like to build in there. And just kind of do a general look at everything over, just, it's been a while since you've been flying and things have been sitting. And just look over everything. Just do a good visual, strong visual on the whole airframe, but look over the engine area, see if you see anything that you don't like, and then, address it. So that's one thing. And then on your pre-flight, you're going to be looking at fuel. Fuel's been sitting around, see if anything's settled out in there. So, strain it a little bit more than maybe you normally do when you're flying a lot. Just let a little bit of it flow into a nice container that you can take a look at it. A lot of times there are small little gas jars and testers are not that big. But what I usually like to do is, grab a nice clean Tupperware or something that you can see through, or one of those those glass measuring cups that you can see through, and then strain a little bit more than usual if it's been sitting for a while. Because a lot of times things settle, but it takes a while for them to get exactly where the sump is. The sump usually is the lowest point, but it's not always the case. So that's kind of those ideas right there. And then just look over your control surface. Maybe it's time, they've been sitting and they're dry. And a lot of the, we'll go over to like, the Cessnas, here's one of our Cessnas. And just kind of look, you normally pre-flight, look at all the control lock is on. I'm going to take that off real quick. But now, when you're taking a look at your rod ends and things, and just make sure everything's secure. But then look inside there; those little bearings. We'll get a flashlight, Dusty, so you can see. You can see like those bearings that hold on to the control surfaces. They're just like an eyeball bearing. They call them Heim bearings. A lot of times it's nice just to give them a little squirt of I use a Tri-Flow or LPS2 or something like that, and that'll just kind of lubricate them if they've been sitting there and not wanting to move. Makes them last longer. They're lubricated. They're not rubbing. If there's any grit in there, a lot of times you can just rinse them out with something. And I mean, they are mostly sealed, but you got to remember on those bearings, they're part of them as they swivel back and forth or open to the air. So it's always good to do that. And then we'll, hit your control surface hinges. Take a look at the tail. Just do a good pre-flight on there. Take a look at any of your hinge locations here. A lot of times by the hinge areas, you'll see that wire, that's a bonding surface. That bonding wire connects the elevator to the stabilizer in this case. And just look at those things, because if those need to be on there. They transmit. If you have your static wicks dissipating any energy, electrostatic energy, but now you can't have that not tied to the airframe. So those bonding straps connected to the rest of the airframe and let the clear path going out the static wick. So, and again, just take a look at, hit any bearing area there, bearing area here, and look at the same thing, just going over all your bearing areas and rotating spots on the control surfaces and look at that. You might have a trim tab. Just make sure your trim tab, this is the elevator trim tab on the Cessna. Go through the whole, actually move the trim tab to its full extent and see how it feels. They usually don't get moved more than a little bit when you're trimming out from the center position, but it's not a bad idea just to check the whole travel of it. Make sure nothing has really gotten in there and bound it up. And then there again, depending on how, there's little mechanisms and rod bearings there. Hit those and give them a little lubrication there. Make sure everything's working good there. So as far as that on the airframe, see if you see any evidence of I don't know, something happened in your hangar that you don't, any birds or anything that might have been coming through there, and I don't know if they hang out in the rafters and they were to have a little problem and then left some droppings. Don't want droppings and things on your antennas because they don't work very good. So that's something people kind of forget about and go, oh gee, I don't know why I wasn't transmitting real well. And it turns out that in hangars, you'll see birds perching and nesting, and they'll deposit in a nice way onto certain areas that are below their nesting area, and it can be quite a large amount of stuff. I've seen it, and so just take some clean soap and water, make sure your antennas are looking good and they're clean, because the antennas you can't even paint antennas. Those are a coating that is put on those antennas, and they don't want any type of paint or substance on the antenna. It affects the broadcast and receiving abilities of those things. So, and at the same time, look around the antenna. What you can do is a lot of times your silicone around. There's a GPS antenna there, 2 GPS antennas, and take a look at the silicone around, especially on the top of the wing where it's above the fuselage on there. You don't want it leaking in. And there you can just use like a clear silicone or whatever works well for you. And if you see that breaking down, put a little silicone around the base of them. That's always good to do. It's a good time to check that, because over the winter things dry out and crack, and you don't want to be going flying somewhere and it's on a ramp somewhere for a week when you're going up north or whatever, and a bunch of rain come by there and you go, Jesus, really wet inside my airplane. It's really steamy and wet. So you see all this water residue inside. So just double check all your top surfaces and caulking areas, and just get a little silicone caulk, clear silicone caulk, and run a bead around there. It's a good time to do it in spring. Next thing that I'd like to talk about as far as looking at your aircraft is kind of looked at the engine compartment. We looked at a stronger, more thorough pre-flight on it. And we always pre-flight our tires, looking for any problems, any flat spots, or checking the tire pressures. looking at the brakes, see if there's any leaking around the brake area. This one looks really good right now. You'll notice that some of your brake discs, might have some rust on it. That usually will just wear off. You could try cleaning with some brake cleaner and a little soft scrubby if you want to. Other than that, most of that minor rust will just kind of polish off the first few times you use your brakes. Usually is not a problem. If it's severe or you see any problems with it, definitely take a look at maybe do something with your brake discs and the brakes at that point. Now on this, we're looking at we have a solid gear leg, but on an airplane that has an oleo strut, such as on the nose gear or the nose gear here, it's always good just to I always like to just 5606 hydraulic. That's what's in braking systems, most oleo struts and GA aircraft that we're dealing with. There's a can of it, quart of it. You can get that. And what I like to do is put it in a spray bottle. One of the best things, any of those seals and struts working properly. And as you can see, this one, they get dirty. They get dirty and gummed up. All these dirts go into these rubber seals in there when you start the landing and moving around process of taxiing and things. So what I always like to do is take a rag and I like to polish off the chrome with 5606. 5606, as you'll see, it'll leave the proper oily, that's what's inside there, proper oily, slippery content to it. You use some other substance and you don't know how it's going to affect the seals and different things. So look, I got that cleaned off there, cleans them up. So now when this chrome goes back up through that seal, it's nice and clean. It has the same fluid and material that's on this side, and the pressure side in the storage area. And it just gives you a longer life on those seals because, it's not a complete cheap thing to go in there and have all of your seals replaced by your mechanic. So that's something you could do while you're doing your inspection. Just grab a rag and a bottle of 5606. And at the same time, after you looked over your brakes and saw that brake pads, everything looked like there's plenty of material on there. And let me grab real quick. I'm going to grab a typical brake lining and just kind of show you what is proper amount of thickness on it. Here again, it depends on the manufacturer and the pad chart. And Rusty, let's come over to this chart and see if I can guess. You can see there's a lot of different brake linings and different wear indications. This shows like McCauley brake disc identification and wear. This is the Cleveland, and APS has just the APS in front of it instead of the Cleveland number. But you can see all the dimensions. You can check out what minimum thickness on a disc. So if your disc isn't all grooved out, but you think it might be getting a little thinner, you can measure that distance and go to a chart and say, hey, is that still serviceable? That's something you can do. Now, when it comes to linings, they're, just like on a vehicle, just a lot smaller. It's a material, brake material. Some of them are metallic, semi-metallics, and they're riveted onto your brake pad. Most of them are. Some are actually just set into place, but most of them are riveted on. And if you notice that they're getting a little thin, usually how I look at it is, when you start getting below half this thickness, and Cleveland says about 100 thousandths. Yeah, that, depending on your usage, you got to be careful because you don't want where they get attached is riveted on. You don't want that pad to go down to those rivets because those rivets will actually grind into your disc and groove it. And that, instead of replacing $10 pads, you're replacing a $200 or more disc. So I always look at that. Pads are cheap. So, just take a look at that thickness. Always be looking at that. One of the telltale signs that it's getting a little too thin, there's actually two of them. One of it is you go to your reservoir and you notice your reservoir is lower and you don't see any leaks. Well, what's happening is your reservoir drops because your caliper is moving out. The piston in your caliper is moving out. And so it's the fluid is being moved outward closer to keep your brakes and the pads tighter. So you notice that when a thin set of pads, your level will drop on your reservoir. So if you can see into your reservoir, some are not able to be seen, or it's harder to check the level of them. Sometimes a little straw or something on it. Pipers are pretty easy. You can just open up the cowl and look right inside there and see where it is from the level. And then the other thing, as far as the level of or how you can tell that the brakes are wearing, is if you start to see a little oozing around the brake caliper, that, and you notice, boy, that puck seems like it's moving. It's quite a distance. You can kind of see it in there. It's just an O-ring that holds that in. And a lot of times when the brakes get a little bit thinner and that caliper puck comes out, it leaks a little bit. It seeps a little bit of fluid. And at that point, it's not necessarily that O-ring is bad, but it just is getting close to the edge of not sealing real well on the caliper. And you might see a little drip down there. And a lot of times that's as simple as taking your brakes apart, pushing the caliper back in, put new pads on, and everything's just fine, cleaning that up. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to put a new O-ring in there. Could need one, and it's not a real big deal for you to bring it over to your mechanic to do that, but you can get by. But mainly the pads, you want to make sure the thickness of the pads are ample, and don't just check one side versus the other. Say, well, I checked one side, it's fine, because as we all know, with turning tendencies, we brake more depending on how your prop rotates on one side versus the other. You usually have to step on one pedal a little bit harder than the other. So so that's a little note on brake windings and pads. So the next thing I'd like to talk about is, we'll get back to our wheels and tires. I want to show a little bit of work with wheels and tires and checking bearings. But right now I want to go on the things that are a little bit more just on your pre-flight. And so the other thing, light also has been sitting around quite a bit. If you haven't been flying a lot of times I always tell people, if you don't fly much in the winter, take your battery out of your airplane. Keep it in a warm spot in your basement. That's the best thing that you could do. But if you don't, and it's in there, one thing you want to do before going out to fly, say you're going to fly on Sunday, and do your pre-flight on Saturday, and possibly put it on a charger if it needs a charge, if you haven't had it on trickle charger. So we're going to take our multimeters if we want to and take a look, and the voltage on that 11.52, that's kind of low. That's not going to have a lot of capacity to start your airplane. A good fully charged battery is going to be above 12.5. Usually after they've been sitting and you've got a full charge on most batteries, they say it should stabilize out 12.8. That's a really good new battery. But that's your best case scenario on that. But this is, of course, a 12-volt battery. If you're looking at a 24-volt battery, let's take a look at this one. This one's at 2243, 22.42 now. That's quite low. And there again, on a full charged 24-volt battery, you like to see them closer to 25 volts. They consider a full charge on that at about a 25.5 volts when it's fully charged. And you can tell that where your battery's at when you put it on charger, and say after about when it's on the charger, it's going to be charging at roughly 14 volts when it gets to full charge. If you were to read your battery chart, if you were to read in line with your battery charger, let's just say we had this on and we were going to read at the terminal while it was on there. You would notice as it starts to get to not accepting any charge, and when it's considered full charge, you'll see the battery charger approaching 14.2, 14.3, usually not much higher than that. And it means it's not, that battery's fully charged, it's not accepting anymore. Now, obviously, when you take the charger back off of it, you'll watch and the numbers will start declining and declining and declining until they hit that fully charged level of, say on a 12 volt, 12.8, 12.5, and then they'll stay there. They won't drop off further. If they drop off further, you got a bad battery. It's not good. And at that point, you might want to bring it into your mechanic and say, hey, can you do a capacity test on it? Or just maybe it's time to purchase a new battery. Other thing you want to do is you got different style batteries. You got a sealed battery like this one. This here, the electrolyte is impregnated into what they call a glass mat. There's a fiberglass matting type of thing with the materials in there, and it soaks into those mats, and it's sealed. It's they kind of call it the recumbent gas, or there's some of the different styles. Like there's some gel batteries out there. There again, that electrolyte is in the battery, sealed up, and it never is supposed to leave the battery. These batteries here are what we call serviceable batteries, and they have vent caps on the top. And what we'll do is we take a look, and depending on the manufacturer, they'll have different areas, but you see, if we can get inside there, you can see those plates. Those are the plates that do the work, the lead plates and different metals, and they are flooded. This is called a flooded battery, so they need to be flooded with electrolyte. When you first start them up, you actually put the electrolyte, the battery acid in there. After the battery acid has been in there and it's been used, the water portion will boil out of these batteries and evaporate out. You don't add any more electrolyte, but you add distilled water. And what you want to make sure is that they're filled up to the proper level. And now on Gill, you'll see that there's a little neck in there. You want to bring it up to the bottom of that neck. And there you can just go online and any battery company. You don't want to overfill them, but you want to make sure that it's above those plates. When they start going dry is when your battery all of a sudden loses a cell, and you go, oh boy, and you're out somewhere. So what I just did is I got distilled water here, and I'm filling it. Use a funnel so you don't spill. But there I filled it up to the bottom of that plastic collar that's in there, right where Gil wants it. And then install the vented cap again. And so you want to go through and check all your cells. You're going to have 12 cells on a 24 volt battery. You're going to have 6 cells on a 12 volt battery. So go through, check those. Having the proper fluid in there is going to make your battery last longer and function properly. And when it goes low and those plates go dry, that's when they tend to short out a cell. And you go to start it just fine, turn on your avionics, your lights, and it drives the light just fine. But you go to hit your starter, and all of a sudden it's like your starter just goes click. You're like, well, what happened? Well, if you're to check a load on there, as soon as you put a load on it, it went from 12 volts down to 9 volts. And that's not going to be enough to start your airplane. So good to do that before going out, because you planned on Sunday, get out there and you haven't done this. Now you got a dead battery or a low battery, and then you have to cancel your flight. And you're just, it's a big letdown, especially when you haven't been flying for a while. So I always say, come on a day or two and prepare, check it. If you find it low, if you find that you need to put some distilled water in your battery, do that. Put it on a charger overnight. Even being on a trickle charger that keeps them charge, in the state of charge, they will, by being on the trickle charger, lose their fluids inside there. They will, it will boil some of that off. So you still, even though you said, well, it says it's charged, definitely, even if it's been on a trickle charger, check it if it's a flooded cell battery. So, and those are things that really, those are, it's crucial. I mean, it's, we haven't been flying it a whole lot. And, if you don't have it on like a trickle charger or a charger, just the nature of a battery, they have internal resistance and they lose a certain percentage every day. And that's just how they're made. It's just one of the drawbacks. Just sitting there on a flooded cell, they lose capacity. It's not like a Duracell that says it has a shelf life of whatever 10 years when you see the pack. A flooded cell battery will automatically be discharging because of any internal resistance that's built up between the cells. Each cell will kind of draw a little bit on itself, and the manufacturer will even have that level of what to expect for a voltage drop over time without it being charged. So doesn't mean there's anything wrong with the battery. And then you got to remember, if you had it in your airplane, there's a few things that are not on the master switch. There's a few things that on the avionics, clocks, certain things that are always running and they're just off a fuse that are hooked up directly to the battery. So you do have, most airplanes do have a little bit of a drain on the battery system, even with the master switch off. So that kind of talks about our extended pre-flight. We've cleaned up our struts. We've looked over our tires. All of a sudden we're like, I tell you what, I don't know. I didn't realize last fall when I put my plane away, gee, I gotten kind of low on tread on that one. Maybe it's time to change the rubber on the tire. So we'll go over a tire change. There's other things to look for too. Here's that surface rust that we see on these. That will build up on it, but you just have to look for how bad it is. And you're checking also for grooving, and then again, if you really want to check thickness, that's something that's just a typical disc there, but there's something else you might want to check for. That takes a little bit more effort if you don't take the tire off, and that is flat spots. What if you just, I landed with my feet on the brakes last fall. I kind of remember that. Well, you might want to take a look at it. The rubber on this tire is pretty good on a lot of the areas, but boy, that's round down pretty good on this side. I mean, this tire is, I don't know if you can see it from the camera angle, but it's pretty flat. That's going to be kind of a really lumpy landing. At that point, you might say, yeah, there's good tire on here, and on 95% of it. It's going to take me a long time to get this flat spot worn out because this is pretty much almost down to the cords. No cords showing. It's still kind of a legal tire, but it's going to really ride uncomfortably. It'll be like your landings won't feel like they're greased on, even if they are, because as soon as you touch, it's going to be, big shaking. Everything's vibrating. It's like, what was that? Oh yeah, well, your friend rides with you, and it's like, well, I had a little trouble with my last landing, and I squared off my tire, and I haven't changed it yet. So, but anyways, that's something also to look at, and that might not be as easy to see. You might want to roll your plane a little bit, and as you roll it and it falls into this what you think is a groove or a crack, you're like, oh, what's wrong with my hangar floor? And then you look at it, no, this is the flat spot. Carry your airplane back off that flat spot. So something to take a look at, and always take a look at your sidewalls, make sure they're not dry checked. And you'll see a little cracking in there. And that's just showing you that the rubber on there. I mean, if you're like me, boy, I tell you, my tires last many years. They start dry checking and falling apart before I know. And that's not true. I'm lying on that. But Some pilots, they do. I have seen them. They come in and it's like, yeah, I've had those tires on there for 20 years. And I'm like, yeah, they still got good rubber tread on it, but the rubber is kind of disintegrating and getting all checked. So that's at some point where, that tire is starting to fall apart. It's beyond its useful limit. So take a look at that too. It's a good time to look at it. More noticeable too, because it's been sitting in one spot maybe most of the winter. And so it's kind of compressed. So, there again, check your tire pressures, make sure that, roll them around a little bit. You think you have a flat spot, it really isn't. It's just the tire holding that shape of where it was sitting. So be careful on that. Don't say I got to change my tire because there is. Make sure that flat spot is ground down because they will have kind of a low spot from sitting in one spot all winter. So that's a good time to, if you're going to change this. Now, I also, before I say anything else, part 8. You look at 43, part 43 in there. I always want to put this caveat in there because I don't want people to overstep their legal bounds. If you look at Appendix A to Part 43, you look at letter C, that's the preventative maintenance items that you can do. So always make sure that these are things that are allowable to do. Other than that, if they're not, then work with your mechanic and bring in the parts that they have to do. So, I mean, when I talk about replenishing hydraulic fluid and hydraulic fluid reservoir, we can go fill our brake fluid stuff. That's fine. So we get our 56. We should definitely spray 5606 on our struts and clean them up. And then you look at all the different things you can do. So always go in there and make sure replacing and servicing batteries. We just talked about that. Servicing batteries. What does that mean? Filling them with electrolyte, charging them back up again. So there's a lot of things in there. So I always replacing or cleaning spark plugs. That maybe you pull your airplane out, and even though it was running fine last fall, you're running up and it's got a little misfire. Then maybe it's time to check your spark plugs first before necessarily calling a mechanic. Could be just the fact that the spark plug sitting in there got a little contamination on it. They are metal. And maybe they picked up a little chunk of rust or something, something sat in there, and it might be as simple as cleaning them, and if that's what you feel comfortable with, that is on the list. So always look at your list on preventative maintenance on line C. And also, after you take a look at something that you can do and it's on the list, make logbook entries. A lot of times we see people bring in their airplane for annual. And they say, well, I did this, and that. I'm like, well, how do I know you did? Well, I just told you. Like, your logbook's stated. Well, yeah, I don't know about a logbook entry. Yeah, make a logbook entry. It's maintenance you've done. It is a requirement. The FAA has that as a requirement. Plus, it's good to know what you did, when you did it, and what you did. And it's a legal thing that you can do. They also, if you look in that area of Part 43, I've talked about it in my maintenance conferences before. You can look in there and it shows how to make a logbook entry. You'll be signing it off under 43.9. It shows exactly what to state, what you need to have in there. And it's pretty simple. Even if it's wrong, it's not as accurate as maybe your mechanic would do. Go back and look at one of your mechanic entries and go, hey, that looks pretty good. And then just do that. Put your pilot certificate in there, your name, and sign it. And they'll be good on that. So you saw that you changed tires, service tires. Now you look in there and it says change brake lining. You can't do your brake lines, but it's simple. You can take your brake pads and the parts that hold the pad on there, and bring them to your mechanic and have him run them on there. So just be careful what you do, but you can certainly take the pads off, take the calipers, unscrew the 2 bolts and do that, and take your wheel off and service that. So now, what are we going to do? Decide we're going to change this tire. So
yeah, that's what
well, First thing you're gonna want to do is I kind of did this so we don't waste a whole lot of time on it. Best thing to do is go down to O'Reilly's and get yourself this valve stem toolkit. It's really nice. It's got 3 ends on it for a variety of uses. This one with the cut in there is the first thing we're going to use after we take the cap off, and that's going to remove the valve stem. There's a little cutout, and you're allowed to you twist it out, and it pulls your valve stem. So now you got your valve stem out, and all the air is going to leak out of your tire at that point. Hopefully it does. If it doesn't leak out, it means you had a flat tire. It didn't leak out of this one because I just took the valve out before I got online with you guys. So take a rag, make sure you got your stuff. Don't lose your parts. Figure out where your parts go, your cap. You're going to be reusing that. So the next thing is we got bolts holding this split rim together. Got 3 of them on this one, but let the air out. Make sure you let the air out because that's under pressure. But we're going to take these bolts out. But the first thing we want to do prior to doing that is we want to unseat the bead. As you see, this bead is already unseated. I already did this. But if you don't unseat the bead, the 2 halves are going to stick in the tire, and you're not going to be able to get them apart and out of that tire. So you got to unseat that bead. And there's basically 2 ways of doing it. You have a bead breaker, which I have because I do a lot of tires here, and they're not super duper expensive. You can probably get them on eBay. This is a Myers hydraulic one. I don't know exactly what pricing they are. You can probably go to Aircraft Tool Supply, but it's just a simple lever. You know, you got the base where you put your tire on. You got an arm coming up here with a lever with different position points, and then a little shoe that is going to push on the tire and break from the bead. So center that on there on this case, and then carefully, don't touch the rim. We don't want to damage the rim. We put that shoe on the rubber and we work our way around like this. And then when you get around to a certain point, all of a sudden your tire will just release off the rim, and it'll just kind of go, it'll make a little pop sound and thump down. And now it's not seated on the rim anymore. Now, there is another way to do it, which if I don't have one of these in my hanger, and that is, really need to do is grab a board. What I will do is we'll call the far aim. Don't call that far. I'm using their far aim for. So what you want to do is support, because your tire extends over the rim and thicker. You'll be sitting down, it'll be too much cushion on there. So what you're going to do is you're going to carefully bring it up to your bench, put it down on a board just on the back side of the rim, then come up on the rim and just start working your foot around that bead, and that your foot becomes the like the shoe on the bead breaker. Get that side off, and then flip your rim over like that, and always have your rim on something. You don't want to be having the edge of the rim or your disc on anything, a nice block of wood, but you want to have it free enough that you have something stable to stand on too. Do the same thing, stand on the center, being careful, and work that tire off the rim. That's what you do if you don't have a bead break. So now we've taken the air out, we've unseated everything. Put the frame back up here again. And now it's just a simple task of grabbing your socket wrench. And I usually used to use an open end on the backside because you can get in there and hold those at an angle. And we're going to take off the hardware. You'll notice that the rim now, since it's unseated, we'll want to rotate. You gotta be careful on that because you don't want to tug on the let it rotate too much. Grab the back side of the rim as you're holding that, like this, because you don't want to put extra pressure on your tube stem, especially if you're going to be reusing your tube. And there's nothing wrong with reusing it. Inspect it, take a look at it, make sure there's no chafing or pinching on it. I'll show you what that's like. So come on here, go to the and see it just moved a little bit on me, so just be careful, grab it, get a better grab on these. One way so you don't have them grab so much, which before you break your bead, is you could just crack the pressure off the nuts prior to it. Don't loosen them much. We don't want that, especially if your tire's under pressure, but you can do it before you break the bead and the air's out of it. So you don't have that tendency of the rim rolling on you. I didn't do that on this one, but that helps you hold it, or that helps you not have to hold the rim so much so you're putting pressure, because you see if I were to let that rotate, it's just going to put pressure on that stem, and we don't want to tear that stem off the tube. So these, I didn't break the torque off of them. You could do that prior to releasing the bead on the rim. All right, so I got my nuts off here. Sometimes those washers want to stick a little bit, so you just tip it over a little bit. And then you can do it in whatever way and system you want to do. I like getting rid of the disc and the backside first. And then when I do that, stick them a little bit there. I do that, the bolts come with me. You don't even have to take the bolts out of that area. Just go like that, set that on the table. Flip the tire over, working out the stem out of the center there. There, we've done it. So got our wheel halves out. We got our tube in there. So now we're gonna carefully work our hand around the tube. Sometimes they stick. You powder them, you do whatever you can, but you want to make sure if they're stuck, that you just don't rip it. You want to carefully peel it off the inside of the tire. So I'm just going around that tube and releasing it, making sure that it's not sticking to the inside of the tire. And this one isn't. And then carefully your tube off. There's your tube. And what we can do is, we know that the tire here, that's done. So we're just going to discard that. But what we can do is, a lot of times to see this kind of and just take your air nozzle for dusting or blowing things off, and you have the valve out right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a little bit of air, put my finger over the stem, and then I'm just going to look at that tube. I'm going to check to see if I see any spots that are heavily worn. I mean, this one's looking good. The stem's looking good. The area around there, I don't see any areas where it's ballooning out. Looks really nice, so I would say this is probably a very good candidate for reusing it. I mean, I don't see any scuffing marks, any area around where it might rotate with if the tire, all that movement with the tire, you see some powdery, really bad, scuffy, like it took a sandpaper to it. Yeah, that tire and that tube had been working, and it's probably low tire pressures at one point. And you did some landings, and it's just kind of going back and forth. That's the one reason, is tires don't necessarily show that they're low. That's why I always say it's good to check the tire pressures. I kind of implemented something here, Rusty, didn't I? We had a lot of ripped pinholes, because these tires get little areas in them, and they just are not super strong. They're almost like little inclusions in the rubber. And if you abuse them a little bit, they get to the point where they just separate, and then they let their air out. That's kind of a problem when it's on the runway or the taxiway. And I'm like, boy, we're having a lot of pinholes and a lot of flats out there. And so I started looking at it, and I'm like, gee, every time it comes in on 50 hour, things are a little bit on the low side. It's like, so we implemented checking tire pressures, because they don't always visually show you that they're low. You think, oh, I don't know, it looks pretty good to me. Take the tires and it looks fine. You put an air gauge on there, and it's like, okay, so your tire's supposed to have 30 PSI in it, and it has 20. It's down 10. That's 1/3 down is going to make a difference on how that tire wears in there. And so what we'll do is we'll say they're down, we'll fill it up to the proper amount, and then we'll see, since it's checked the next flight or the next day, we'll see if it goes back down. Now we know if we got a problem and it's a leaky tire. A leaky tire is better than a pop tire because leaky tire usually gets you back off the runway. So then all of a sudden we go, boy, we had to put air in it again. Guess what? Time to change the tube. So you're preventing yourself the catastrophic failure out on the runway. So just something to think about on that. So that is how we disassemble. Now, what I'm going to show you here, we're going to show putting the tire back. We'll do that first. Rusty, how are we doing on that?
Got about 15 minutes.
15 minutes. All right. So we will. So here we got our new tire. And you'll notice on the tire, so if you notice on the tire, if you look at them, a lot of times you'll see, you look on either side, you'll see a mark, a red mark. So we're looking for a red mark here. This manufacturer doesn't make a really bright one. It's right here. What they do is when they manufacture them, they go there and they find out that it's a light spot, a little bit more of a light spot. And so they mark that spot of the tire with a red spot. And in theory, there's two reasons for it. You'll see there's one marked on, here's this one a little bit brighter there. You notice that I put the stem on that spot. Well, why would I put the stem there? Well, if it's the light spot on the rubber and it's the heavy spot on the tube, because the stem's there off center, that's going to be putting some weight out in this area. We line it up that way. Number one, that's why we do that. Number two, because we're running pretty low pressures on big tires, 24, 30 PSI, and the beads are not super sticky beads like they would be on a sealed tire because we have a tube tire. Your car's the bead really sticks a lot more because that's what you have to seal the tire. Now it's a tube style. And we're landing and putting pressure, and the rims, and the brakes are wanting to rotate that rim. That rim can start to walk a little bit. And as it walks off that line, we know that we've been contorting on that stem, and that stem could fail because it's being stretched and moved around. And it also lets you know that you probably haven't had the best tire pressure in there because that was allowing that rim to move. So that's why we usually line that up for two reasons. It gives you kind of an eyeball of where things are. So we find that's going to be where our stem's going to come out. We're going to take some of our talc, and you can use baby powder. This is tire talc. Anything that's like cornstarchy material will be. What we want to do on that is we just want to kind of spread that around inside there. Get that moving around. Don't want to put too much because all that's going to do is beat up and clump up and cause an abraded spot for your inner tube. When you can see, you'll have too much when you pull it out, and all these little ball bearings of talc, which they're black because they have some of the rubber worked into them, and you'll see, and it kind of makes it's like the princess and the pea in the mattress. It causes an irritation spot or a pearl for the oyster. So now what we're going to do is we're going to find that spot there. We got our stem right there. We're going to just kind of squeeze the air that I put into it out of it. That'll help us fit it in there. And just shove it. Doesn't matter how you just, don't fingernails or whatever. Don't jam it with anything rough. We're just working it around. Take your time, get it between those halves there. You don't care how wrinkly it is at this moment. We're just going to get it in there, kind of in that approximate area. Now, we don't know how it is. There's probably folds in there. So that's when we're going to hit it with some air. Okay, some air. There you go. Let's that air out. Do that. Okay. Get that position. Just line that stem up again. Hit it with some air again. Just make sure all those folds are in there. Everything looks pretty good. I like that. take our stem tool. That's why that stem tool works really nice. We're going to put that through the stem hole. Twist this end on the tube, and that helps us pull our stem through the tire. Boom, and it gives us a place to hold on to it. And so we flipped over and do the other side. So now we're lined up with our spot there. We flipped over like this. Make sure that the tube is not anywhere near those mating surfaces there. And we grab our disc. Now there again, if you wanted to measure the disc, that would have been a good time to do it. I'm not going to do this for time practices, but you know, this one's looking pretty good. It has some wear on it. You can see it's kind of necking down from this is the normal surface, but right now for showing this, I'm just going to line up those bolts. You want to listen for the metal on metal click. Those two halves are going together. That's what you want. If you hear a thud, you got the tube in there, and you don't want to pinch a tube because that's just going to make you have to do this all over again. So now you hold it, keep them holding pressure on there. You heard that together. Now what we're going to do is we're going to just start one of the nuts and washers on there. What I do, depending on, sometimes the tires have a little more preload. So I'm just going to start with one, because this case I could do all three at the same time. What matter? There again, I'm just going to snug this up. We're going to start with one. Sometimes you're fighting these a little bit. You have to squeeze together as you're doing it, and you want to make sure you hold those rims together. So I just light twist, not much pressure on it. It's together now. That rim is together. Then I can take my time to put the rest of the other bolts in. Sometimes there's 6 of them, and this or more. This one has 3. This tire doesn't have a lot of bow to it, but some of them, they come out with a bow and you're fighting these halves. If that's the case, when you set it down and do that, put it down like this underneath your table and squeeze it together and start your nut underneath here. And then you can flip it up and finish tightening it. So put our other hardware back on this one. Washers. And what I always do is I just there again, I lightly snug them. Don't over twist them. These are not huge bolts. Not huge bolts. Snug them up. Easy way of snugging them up without over torquing is hold close to the socket. And mechanical leverage is not going to be as such that you can over torque. Not going to be able to, with my thumb, I'm not going to be able to get much pressure there. That just saves some of those, because we're going to be torquing these. And worst thing is when you go torque something and you go to torque it and it's already up past torque. That defeats the purpose of the stretch. So always, when you're using a wrench, don't get out here with a big wrench. You know, all right, I was barely doing it. Your mechanical leverage is a lot better. So keep it up close by the socket. All right. Now we did that. We're going to now. Here's the other thing. I have some light pressure on there. It's enough to see the frame is together. Now, if I were to go torque these, I might have a little trouble of holding it. So what you can do, but you got to be careful about this, and that is I'm going to carefully seat that, but you want to, generally speaking, torque these first. But in this case, I'm going to be fighting this, and I know it's going to be all over the place. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the stem back in. There's 2 ways of doing it. You can try it with the nozzle and see if you can get it to seat like this. We'll see if that works this time. Okay. That did see it. That worked okay on this tire. Sometimes it won't do that, but now what we can do is now we can go back and torque it. If not, put the stem in and give it a little bit of pressure. Don't over pressurize, just enough in there because you haven't torqued down your amps yet. So you got to be careful about it. You don't want to stretch those bolts till they're under. You're checking stretch in a bolt when you're torquing. So that's the main thing you have to do is if you put pressure on that and get it to seat with the stem, make sure you alleviate that pressure back off of it. Because a torque wrench is measuring the stretch of a bolt that's calibrated into a torque. So if you're putting pressure on the bolt, you're already inducing some of that. So the torque wrench doesn't do you any good. But we can't have this rim moving all over the place. So now we've seated it back into the bead, so it's not going to rotate on us. No pressure on it again. And now we're going to set our torque. So in this case, you look at the manufacturer and the rim here, and if the sticker's still good, you'll see a torque range. This one on here, hard to read, but it says 150 on there. And it depends on, you know, what size bolts these are, how many they have, the manufacturer, and what they picked. So that's 150 and it's inch pounds. So I'm going to move my torque wrench to not newton meters, but I am going to go to, it's hard to read on these etched ones here. All right. There we go. Got it to coming up on 150. So now we just go through here. Put our wrench back on this side. And we're going to grab it. Make sure the rim doesn't twist on you. Here I click. And there again, if you have, you know, if you have more than one, if you have like 6 of them or a pattern, if you notice 3 bolts, I can't alternate. It is automatically alternating. You know, the idea is same as on your car, putting your car tire on. You always want to alternate your tightening of something, a bolt pattern. So you always want to, and in this case, it's exactly what you would. If you had 6 of them, you'd be going this one here, this one there, that one there, this one there, this one there, and that one there. That's only 3. So that's all you have is a pattern. You can't going to the other side is going to that one. So that's why we can just go around in a circle with a 3 bolt pattern. So now we've torqued that. And what I like to do one last time, that is where I put the stem in, you never reposition that tube enough. So the more you reposition it and get it with that air inflated, and then when it's shrinking down, it has less place to move. So now we're going to insert our stem back in and grab the other side of our tool. And give that a good snug tight. Don't go crazy wild, but don't leave it loose. Now, let's get out to our, this happens to be a tire pressure gauge and a inflated and same. Now, if you notice, the tube just kind of fell down in there. So the trick is don't want to put pressure on the tube with it. You know how you put this on there. So get it in there and kind of put your finger and hold it with your finger, and then you'll hear air escaping around the tube a little bit as it squeezes the air out. And now we look at this, and I'm going to set this up to 24 because it's going on a Warrior, and that's what a Warrior is. Good. Give that tube that stem a little tug, making sure it's in the place comfortably. And put the cap back on. We're done. We're done with that. So Rusty, what time do we have? How are we doing?
We are out of time.
We are out of time. I was going to show you, since we have it off, doing bearings, but we'll do that next time. We'll talk about bearings, but that's really simple. But this is a good time to check your bearings. But we'll have to wait till next time. Is there anybody have any questions?
Feel free to either unmute yourself or you can type it in the chat. One person did have a question. Can you point out the oil screen bolt?
Oil screen bolt, if you're going to change the oil. Yes, I can. Get a pointer here. And this is on a Lycomb, correct? Lycombing. Lycoming 4-cylinder, I'll show you the oil screen bolt. They're going to be a little bit different on some of the 6-cylinders. Some of the 6-cylinders, they might be also in that place. Some of the 6-cylinders, they'll be on the side. But what you're going to see is the back of the engine on most 4-cylinders, you'll see a bolt right back, just, to the right of the center line of your sump. This is if you look at that little area right here where on the sump where it has that little stick out portion, that is a tube, a cast tubing of it that runs up here, runs into the accessory case and goes up, and that's where it goes into the oil pump. That's actually the suction screen, and it's sucking the oil up from that suction screen there. So that's where the screen is on these. That is very simple on those type because you can actually see where the oil is being pulled out of the sump, going kind of exterior of the shape of the engine up to the oil pump. The oil pump is actually drawing that up, and then from there, pressurizing the oil.
All right, thanks, Paul. Does anybody else have any questions? All righty, I think that'll do it.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, guys. Thanks for showing up to another seminar. Feel free to email any type of items that you'd like to see. I need ideas. I'd like to have some ideas on it, so just let me know.
All righty.
All right, thanks, guys.